nonprofit dedicated to providing education to a wide audience on renewable energy and sustainable living. We feature a monthly speaker on the last Tuesday of each month, January through October. Coming up in June, we have the presentation from the Philadelphia Orchard Project. The Orchard Project plants orchards in formerly vacant lots, and they've planted over 50 orchards in the Philadelphia region, thereby helping local communities grow the food that they consume. And then in July, we have Stormwater Management for Climate Resilience. This is presented by Rob Traver, the chair of Villanova University's Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. Stormwater affects water quality, soil health, and food production in our estuaries. That brings us to tonight's presentation, rolling out EV chargers in Pennsylvania. If you're not from Pennsylvania, I think you'll find it interesting even so. A lot of it's relevant wherever you live. And we're getting an update from the man in charge, and that man is Colton Brown. Colton is the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Coordinator at the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. He supports the implementation of the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program. I'm guessing he'll tell us what that really is all about. And he leads electric vehicle education initiatives. Colton's previous experience includes managing Level 2 and DC fast charging funding programs. Colton, Colton, are you ready?
Oh, yep. Sorry, it was just cutting out there from when I didn't catch that. Um, yep, all good. All right. Good evening, everybody. So yeah, as stated there, Colton Brown working at PennDOT. That was a lot of words to basically say I do PennDOT's EV stuff. Um, so diving right in here, I'm just going to start off with a little bit of a primer about electric vehicles. I know if any of you own electric vehicles, this can be old hat. But it's still a new topic for a lot of people. So it's good to just make sure that we have all the bases covered and we're talking, we understand the terms and what this is really all about. So first off here, just the basics of why electric vehicles how they benefit drivers and greater community. So even after accounting for the production of an electric vehicle, its recycling at the end of life, generally about 1/3 total life cycle emissions. That's greenhouse gas emissions, also generally lower on your criteria air pollutants as well, and no tailpipe emissions. So that means that particularly for vehicles driven in cities, you can have a significant improvement to local air quality because you don't have any of the particulate matter and other types of emissions coming out of the vehicle. So great reduction in noise pollution as well as the local air pollution, like we mentioned. There's economic benefits for electric vehicles. That's for the driver themselves, saving on fuel and maintenance. Like you can charge at home. It's about like paying $1.50-ish per gallon of gasoline, so significant savings there on the fuel. And it's also worth noting that electricity is produced locally. It kind of has to be. You can't ship electricity overseas. So whereas purchasing oil, some of those dollars are not staying within the country. 100% of your dollars are staying in your local economy when you're driving an electric vehicle. And then if we make the transition to more electric vehicles well, we have the opportunity here to actually onshore a number of manufacturing jobs, both through the production of the EVs, chargers, recycling at the end, etc. So what we mean when we say electric vehicle, So we're all pretty familiar with our typical internal combustion engine vehicle. Many of us have also become relatively familiar with regular, what's called conventional hybrid vehicles over the years. Been around for over 25 years now. Really just adds a small electric battery, small electric motor, allows regenerative braking and other efficiencies to improve gas mileage. While it does have the word electric in it, it's called hybrid electric vehicle. We do not consider a conventional hybrid vehicle to be electric because the only fuel that goes into the vehicle is gasoline. So we're really just talking about our plug-in hybrids and our battery electric vehicles. Plug-in hybrid is just like the conventional hybrid, but it has a large enough battery pack that it can plug into an external electricity source, charge up that battery, travel in some electric-only miles before that battery is closer to depleted, and then it functions just like your traditional hybrid. And then battery electric vehicle is when we fully drop the gasoline engine and we just operate using electricity. There's no tailpipe at all, no emissions from the vehicle itself. And about between 70 and 80% of electric vehicles on the road are the battery electric. So the plug-in hybrid is less common. Once most initial questions revolving electric vehicles have to do with charging because it is new and very different than fueling a traditional gas vehicle. So in part because there are different speeds to charge an electric vehicle. We have level 1 charging, which is just plugging into a regular wall outlet, also referred to as trickle charging for an electric vehicle. Most vehicles will get 4 or 5 miles of vehicle range per hour that you charge that way. Sounds really slow, but vehicles do actually spend a lot of their time parked. So many people find that this is a great primary way for charging their vehicle. Maybe they have a supplemental way to charge, such as a local charging station or work or a place that they frequent, like shopping, to top off when they do travel a longer distance. But they can use that level 1 charging for, basically their home base primary charge either at work or at home. That being said, the most common form of charging is at the level 2 charging speed, which is, if you think of your home, it's like a dryer outlet. You're stepping up to the 220 volt, and it's usually also at a higher amperage than your typical dryer outlet. So electric vehicles will commonly get between 20 and 30 miles of vehicle range per hour that they charge that way. That's enough that even if you were to drive 200 or 300 miles in a day and be almost empty when you plugged in at night, you can have a full charge again the next morning. It's also great for workplaces, destinations, anywhere that people dwell a couple hours or more. Lastly, we have DC fast charging. As it sounds, it is the very fast way to charge. It is closer to what we think of in the traditional fueling at like a gas station, convenience store, along the highway kind of sense. Most vehicles are designed to be able to receive a 10 to 80% charge. So going from a 10% state of charge to 80% state of charge in 20 to 40 minutes is how most vehicles are designed. So this is ideal along our highways, places where people are traveling very long distances, as well as within denser communities where people may not be able to readily charge at home because they don't have off-street parking. So we have the plug types there as well. The real basic here is that traditionally, everyone other than Tesla used the left column, the J1772, and the CCS charging port, which is it's one charging spot that includes both of those charging types. But now most vehicles are transitioning to NACS, which is very slightly modified to the Tesla plug, and everything is moving in that direction. The real important change, though, is that while everyone is moving to the NAC in your vehicle once, because as long as they're talking the same software between the charger and the vehicle, you just need to make the hardware line up and you can get a charge. So we're still in a little bit of a messy. Also want to note that charging an electric vehicle is very much a paradigm switch from how we traditionally think of fueling. Fueling in a gas vehicle is an active process. You have to stand with the vehicle. It takes you about 5 minutes of your time, whereas charging is a passive process. It happens while you do something else. So whether that's sleeping at home, working at work, being at a hotel, shopping, or even when it is along the road charging, you're still going to plug in that vehicle and go inside and go to the bathroom or grab a bite to eat while you're in the middle of a longer trip. So charge while it takes the vehicle longer to charge. Charging in a sense, as long as it's planned out well and incorporated into an existing routine, charging itself actually takes less time because it only takes me about 10 seconds to plug in my vehicle or unplug it rather than the 5 minutes I would be standing with it if I was at a gas station. All right, so where to find charging stations? There's many resources out there, apps. This map you see here is the Alternative Fuels Data Center. We have this data layer incorporated into the 511 PA website and app. So there's many great resources out there, as well as in-vehicle supports many times. But there's certainly a growing number of public charging stations available. And lastly, just a snapshot of where electric vehicle registrations are at in Pennsylvania. You can see that we had a just over doubling in electric vehicle registrations in the last 2 years. And there are about 10.7 million motor vehicles registered in the state, excluding things like trailers that don't have a motor. So we're at 1.3-ish% of our motor vehicles in Pennsylvania are electric now. Continues to go by a couple thousand vehicles every month. We do also have an online interactive map of those electric vehicle registrations. You can view it both by county and by zip code. This is updated quarterly, so we just recently went to end of first quarter 2025, and then generally 2 to 3 months after the end of each quarter, it gets updated to the end of that quarter's data. So it's a pretty cool resource. If you download the background data, you can see the historicals. So I've actually done my own kind of deep dive looking at how the registrations are changing not only on a statewide basis over time, but even within the zip codes and the counties. So there's lots of fun stuff that you can find there. Okay, so that is our crash course on electric vehicles. And now we're going to head into some of the programs and efforts that PennDOT has going on here. I will just briefly pause. I know I can't see the chat from my screen. Is there just anything that came up in the chat that you think would be worth answering now as a question? No, that's fine. Okay, moving on. So in that intro, I mentioned the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. Another mouthful. Basically, the infrastructure law that was passed a few years ago included $5 billion for the build out of a nationwide network of EV charging stations. That was allocated by formula to each state's Department of Transportation. So in Pennsylvania, our share of that $5 billion is $171.5 million. Those funds are to be released for the state's use, each state's use over the course of 5 years. Because of the way federal fiscal years worked out, we actually wound up getting the first 2 years in one go at the beginning. And each year we had to develop and then update a state plan for how we plan to invest those funds. So through 3 of those state plans, we were appropriated 4 out of our 5 years of NEVI funds, which brings us to current, which is that the Federal Highway Administration has basically said they want to change the guidance for the NEVI programs. So since state plans were developed with guidance that doesn't exist anymore, that they're not recognizing the approval of those state plans, which is why we're not allowed to do anything new with our dollars for now. Get into a little bit more detail on that later. But basically, these dollars are by formula to Pennsylvania, to PennDOT, specifically for public EV charging infrastructure. So it would take a new law to change that. And because the NEVI program was made through normal order in Congress, that would require getting through the filibuster in the Senate, full 60 votes in the Senate, so it cannot be rescinded or modified through the reconciliation process that Congress has been working on for a bill recently. So NEVI program is very much, the dollars are for this purpose, and there's not really a path to change that at this time. So in the law for NEVI, each state is required to build out that network of EV charging infrastructure within their state along their major roadways first before we can use it for public charging anywhere else. So in Pennsylvania, we have 1,800 miles, what we call alternative fuel corridors for electric vehicles. That map there shows it for you. And we have to get to that build out certification before we can go anywhere else in where we want to put stations. As we work towards that build out, all the stations that we fund have to be publicly available 24/7. They have to have at least 4 ports. That means they can charge 4 vehicles at the same time. Every port has to have a CCS connector. We talked earlier about the NACS and the CCS. Basically, while many vehicles need an adapter, everybody can use a CCS charger. Most everybody, very high percentage of electric vehicles can use a CCS connector charger. And every charging port has to be at least 150 kilowatt of continuous power. So that's at least 600 kilowatt of peak power at each station. So fast charging speed. All of our stations have to be within 1 mile of a highway exit. So we can't make you have to travel more than a mile off the exit. And you cannot have to go any more than 50 miles in between charging stations if you are staying on that interstate network, essentially. So trying to have very national consistency and assurance that if you're driving an electric vehicle and you're on an interstate highway system, you can go anywhere in the country. That's what this is supposed to solve. So, and along with that, PennDOT has really hit the ground running. We've consistently been among the first 3 states to hit each major milestone for the NEVI program from the beginning. So we completed 3 different funding rounds over the course of 2023 and 2024, resulting in now 90 active projects that are still moving forward. We did sufficiently get our funding to a place of being under contract with Federal Highway that we are still able to move forward for all of our projects. Most states are not able to say that, but we fortunately are. So we are up to, I believe it's 13 stations that are operational. I don't think this map is 100% up to date. There's a couple more that have come operational since this map was generated. We do have that interactive map there that if you can't click it now, you can either find it from Google or I can put it in the chat later. But it is updated pretty quickly and shows you the status of each of our stations. It does have all 13 that are live. So here's a few photos of some of our first stations, as well as a list of each of those that are operational thus far. And we have another several that could be coming online in the next 1 to 2 months here. So that's our NEVI program to date. And then the rest here is kind of looking forward to the remainder of the NEVI program. So we covered that we had to do the high power charging along the interstates first. And now we're looking towards, we have over $100 million in NEVI funds we anticipate will be left after that. So how do we plan to invest in public charging infrastructure once we receive that build out certification? So PennDOT last fall released what we call our community phase framework for the NEVI program, which lays out 4 different types of basically 4 different mini programs or buckets of funds that we would focus on. The first here, and this will be the first program that'll become public after we would receive build out certification, have permission to move forward, is what we call corridor connections. As you can see, our alternative fuel corridor network is really great for a large portion of the state, but not so great for a few other major roadways throughout the state that do have, we use a lot of trip data to figure out which roadways have high amounts of long distance travel, because that's really what the network is for. So we do have some other major roadways here that have much higher volumes, but they're commonly used for 20 and 30 mile trips. So that's not where we focused for corridor connections. We focused on those roadways where we have 50, 100 mile plus trips. So each bubble that you see is an area that we would look to fill a gap along these roadways by funding one of these higher power stations that can get you back on the road in that 20 to 30 minutes. This could still be modified slightly by the time it becomes a public funding opportunity, but this would be kind of like the quick go-to right off the bat, because it functions very much like the funding rounds we're used to doing. And the companies out there that pursue these funds are also very used to pursuing funds with us. So it would be a good way to just continue expanding that charging network right off the bat. But that being said, the vast majority, as you can see here, probably 80+% of how we would use our remaining NEVI dollars would be for community-focused charging. So once we're done with the highway network, we're allowed to do level 2 charging. We're also allowed to do lower levels of DC fast charging. For example, like a 50 kilowatt DC fast charge, which is great for a charging session about an hour. It's a great use case for places like grocery stores or downtowns where people do commonly have a dwell time in that 1 to 2 hour range. So this is really just focused on improving charging access within communities. But as we plan for the community charging rounds, PennDOT recognizes that from Harrisburg, we do not know the local needs, the specific like locally tailored charging needs of all of our communities throughout the state. So we're leaning pretty heavily on our planning partners, basically the rural planning organizations and metropolitan planning organizations throughout the state. And they are currently doing community engagement, public feedback, and looking for what are those priorities for our different communities throughout the state. So that way we can tailor our funding opportunities to what that area wants or needs in their charging. So here you can see a map of those different planning partners throughout the state. So depending on where you live or in the places that you may be familiar with, you can see that they would be working with different planning partners who are collecting all that feedback. You can also find this and all their contact info on PennDOT's website as well. So from that, we will build that up into 4 regional funding opportunities. So Southeast, East, Central, and West. And from there, we'll basically get the regional priorities as well as we'll get to that in a moment here. But essentially, it's probably too much to do the whole state in one go for community charging. So we'll have a little bit of a rolling regional basis, so that way everybody has a little bit more time and can focus on one region at a time for their proposals. Within each of those planning organizations, we want to make sure that we spread the funds throughout the state. So we applied a formula that's mostly population-based to the state, and this is what it came up with for how we would, they're not exacts. It's not this county gets this much, you get this much. It's really just to give you a ballpark estimate of how we would look to spread the funds throughout the state, make sure that we get some projects everywhere consistent with what their charging needs would be. Okay, so there's 2 things that each of those planning partners are working to collect right now. The first is the use cases for that are the highest priority for that area. So that could be downtown charging, it could be convenience stores, it could be destinations, tourism, parks, multi-unit dwellings, anything. We have a long list of ideas. They're not restricted to that list, but it's to help get the thoughts going. So through that community feedback that all of our planning partners are doing, they're identifying these are the top priorities for the types of charging that our communities need the most right now. And the second thing we're looking for is what are the priority communities where that charging should go. So basically, based on what charging already exists and where the needs may be the highest, this could be focused on disadvantaged communities, things like that. Whatever that planning partner thinks warrants paying it a higher priority, that's what we're looking to, and they'll provide us with feedback on. These are the places that you should first look to get charging once you go out and look for bids. Okay. Then we have 2 other much smaller funding topics that we would look to do. One is critical investments, which is, in other words, kind of like the either the special projects or the reserve. So it might be, something like medium and heavy duty charging. It could be doing some charging stations at state facilities like park and rides. Or it could be, hey, that formula really just did not capture the amount of need in this particular county or this region. So we're gonna use a little bit of our critical investments to support that area. So it's really just once we get into it, we're probably going to know that we really did need some extra support for something. And the last is EV workforce. One of the allowable uses of NEVI dollars is to support workforce for EV charging. So we can't help for EV electric vehicle mechanics, but we can help for charging. So this could be, the technicians that either install or maintain EV chargers, and making sure that workforce exists to keep the chargers maintained and working properly for a long time to come. Okay, so there's a quick snapshot of those 4 ways that we would look to use our remaining NEVI dollars. I know I'm covering a lot and going pretty fast. I do have a few other things I'll cover after NEVI here, but definitely want to leave just lots of time for a conversation at the end. So we'll keep moving, and happy to circle back to any questions or further discussion on the NEVI program once we're through the slides here. Some other things that are not NEVI that PennDOT is in here for electric vehicles. One, you can always stay up to date on the NEVI program by signing up for our email list. That's our resource account for email, to let us know you want to be on that. We don't send out updates often, maybe a couple of times a year, just station openings or what's new with the program. We also have a grant from the Department of Energy for testing and demonstrating electric construction equipment for highway projects. So we recently received an electric backhoe through that project, and we'll be looking to get that and some other things out in the field later this calendar year. Charge them with a mobile battery. So it'll be some very interesting. It'll be an interesting project. Learn a lot, and we'll be able to generate some reports and whatnot. So the other departments of transportation or other equipment operators can see how that went and if it was truly net better for either cost or environmental impact, things like that. We have in the works an EV educational video series. So we're looking to release about 5 different videos, each focused on a specific electric vehicle topic. As example, battery fires, or can the grid handle EVs? Just a lot of the slightly tougher questions that people have about electric vehicles, trying to provide just a very unbiased overview answer on that topic. So hopefully be helpful to a lot of people, and we'll probably start releasing those next month or 2 here, and maybe about one a month until they're all out. We have already started sharing some guidance material for local governments for how to ensure level 1 charging over public sidewalks is done safely in their communities. This is a bigger thing in our suburbs around Philly and Pittsburgh, where there's a lot of single-family houses, but that do not have off-street parking. There's a lot of people that wind up burning extension cords over sidewalks. There's just safety concerns there. So with the proper guidelines in place, you can still allow people to do that and charge their vehicles, but without creating an accessibility hazard or safety hazard for your sidewalks. Lastly, just a couple training programs there, one for first responders for battery fires, and the other for technicians for maintaining charging stations. Just raising awareness for those programs, that those are out there and great options. Okay, so I obviously do not work at DEP, our state's Department of Environmental Protection. I used to until about 3 years ago. So I am pretty familiar with a number of their programs. Maybe not the most recent things they've been doing, but just providing you with a brief overview of some of the things that DEP is also doing with electric vehicles. So first here is that Pennsylvania does have a state rebate program for the purchase of electric vehicles. It does have an income cap, so it's only low and middle income. You have to be under 300% of federal poverty. Household income has to be under that to qualify. But if you do, then you can apply for a rebate, $3,000 for a new or one-time used electric, or $1,500 for a plug-in hybrid. It's not point of sale. You have to purchase the vehicle and then you apply for the rebate afterwards and receive that. But it is still like it's available. It's technically first come first serve, but they always set up so that the funds will last through the year. So it's really just as long as you hit the eligibility terms, you'll receive the rebate. DEP has an alternative fuels incentive grant program. This is to incentivize fleet vehicles to transition to alternative fuels. It has become increasingly electric vehicles over the last decade, just because that's where the applications come in. So this program is fuel agnostic. CNG and propane are also eligible, but in the last 2-3 years here, it's been 80+% electric vehicles because that's where the interest is, and that's where fleets are looking for support to make the switch. So it can help with incremental cost of vehicle purchases as compared to the gas or diesel equivalent, and or up to 50% of the cost for the charging infrastructure for charging electric vehicles. So this is annual program. That's a little outdated. It did not open in April, but it should be opening here soon. Generally opens in the spring and then closes the end of the calendar year. DEP back in 2019 released the electric vehicle roadmap, which had a number of recommendations for increasing electric vehicle adoption in Pennsylvania. There was an update booklet in 2021, and they're currently working on a much more revamped version of electric vehicle roadmap, now calling it the zero emission vehicle roadmap because they're adding in hydrogen. And it will add both medium and heavy duty vehicles. The first one just focused on light duty, and then also have some information on hydrogen, but it will really just update and strengthen those recommendations for how Pennsylvania could increase adoption. There's also the Drive Electric Pennsylvania Coalition. Those are public meetings. They're open to anyone. So you can either sign up for the email list or you can check on the webpage. Meetings 3-ish times a year, just on the latest electric vehicle content and education in Pennsylvania. Now we're covering a lot of different things here. So through the Volkswagen diesel settlement funds, DEP awarded a number of projects to medium and heavy duty electric vehicle projects. So mostly electric. There's, I think, 1 or 2 hydrogen in there too. But this is really like kind of like a pilot and demonstration project because it's very it's a significant amount of funding per vehicle, but then there's a lot of tracking and data and like case study analysis as the vehicles are used for the first couple of years. So some of those vehicles are now on the road and collecting data, and DEP should be putting out a lot of useful information to fleet operators over the coming years through those projects to help them decide if it's a transition they want to make as well. I think this is the last one for DEP. They're working on an electric vehicle guidebook for local governments. So very much, there's a lot of resources out there nationally for local governments, but this is tailored to Pennsylvania local governments based on how our Municipal Authorities Act works, differences between borough and township and what you can do, lots of cool stuff like that. So that should hopefully be coming out as a resource available soon, probably mid this year. Okay. Other federal incentives that are out there, other than just NEVI, we do still have 4 different tax credits that help for electric vehicles. So there's 2 that are on electric vehicle purchases for individuals. So that's the new tax credit and the used tax credit. Really important thing here for both of our tax credits for individuals is just to double check everything on the IRS website for that tax credit to make sure that you would be eligible before you would actually go and purchase the vehicle, thinking you're going to get an incentive off, but in some way not be eligible. The new EV purchase tax credit in particular has a number of restrictions, and it goes by the vehicle model and even further how that specific vehicle you're buying was made, where the battery materials came from, etc. So it's just a good thing to double check there. Make sure your vehicle is going to be eligible. The great news on that program, both for used and new EVs, is that it is a point of sale incentive. So the dealership you're buying the vehicle from signs up with the IRS. and they do the paperwork while you're buying the vehicle. They get the tax credit sent directly to them so they can take it off the sale price of your vehicle. And then you kind of true up and claim it when you do your taxes in the following spring. So it's helpful for bringing down the monthly payment of the vehicle. Okay, and aside from the new and used tax credit for individuals, there is also a tax credit for commercial vehicles. That one is 45W, as you can see here. It's got its own complications going on there. It's also commonly referred to as the lease tax credit because when you lease a vehicle, even as an individual, who you're leasing it from can claim the tax credit. So you wind up being able to claim that tax credit for vehicles that would otherwise not be eligible for the tax credit to buy a new vehicle because it still qualifies through leasing. And then lastly, do I have it? Yeah. There is the tax credit for installing fueling infrastructure. So if you do this at a residence, it's up to 30% of costs or $1,000, whichever is less. Can also help out with our public charging stations. The really important piece here is just there's a map. I have the full link there if you want to copy it or if you want to find it online. But you have to make sure that you live within an eligible census tract to be able to claim this tax credit. I think it's about 2/3 of properties are within eligible census tract, but if you're not, then you're not able to claim the tax credit. So just important caveats there before. So just in all cases with the tax credit, there's some complicating rules. Make sure you know what they are before you would assume that either an EV purchase or a charging home charger that you install would be eligible. Okay, hit my 40-minute goal. Leaving plenty of time for questions. Happy to dive into it and really just go in any direction that you want to on electric vehicles.
Thank you, Colton. I think, Joe, are you going to read the questions?
Yeah, yep, I can do that. Thanks for that, Colton. The first question is at a $1.50 per gallon of gas equivalent, what is the kilowatt hour cost?
So I think that when I was running those numbers, the cost per kilowatt hour was around 18. So when it was 18 cents per kilowatt hour, it depending on the vehicle and the model, it was like $1.25 to $1.50. I think electric prices are a little bit higher now, so now I just say $1.50. So I think if your electricity is around 20 cents kilowatt hour, then it's probably around that $1.50. But it does vary based off of model and its relative efficiency. So it's got to do a little math, but it's always well less.
Okay. Next question in the chat it is my understanding that if you do not have a permit from your local government authority for your home charger, your home insurance company can deny coverage if you have a house fire caused by your charging station. Please comment and let others know. By the way, you can get the permit retroactively long after installation of the charger. You will need an electrician who holds a local certification.
I haven't heard that. That's a great, it's a great public service announcement. I'll have to look into it, but very good to know.
How are NEVI projects coordinated with privately funded, publicly available charging stations?
How are they coordinated?
Tom, any additional insight on that?
So you're picking locations along the highways to put in these publicly funded stations.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, maybe Wawa or Sheetz or somebody else is looking to put in their own charging stations. Is there any coordination between the two?
So at each point along the way that we did a funding opportunity, essentially we put out a map that said, along this stretch of 20 miles of exits, we need a station because our analysis finds that there is not a station there that already meets the power level requirements of NEVI. So we need one along this segment of highway to work towards our no more than 50-mile gap in between stations. So then everybody came to us and they said, here's my project. I'm at this location. Here's my project. I'm at this location. We had a lot of different ways that we were scoring these projects and selecting them. But we selected one project from within each of these bubbles, as we call them, and we said, okay, you have funding to put in your charging station, and that's how we selected them. So if somebody else chose to put in a charging station without our funds, they can do that. We wouldn't even necessarily know until it pops up on the map. But we had to work off of what was available, which is we can see these are the stations that are available. And even then, you may have stations that were already open and, seemingly at a very high power, but for whatever reason, they either didn't quite hit the power level requirement of NEVI, or even beyond that, maybe they had a station that was at the power level requirement, but they weren't willing to provide the information we needed to count it. There's a few rules behind the scenes on how we actually get to count stations as meeting towards our build out requirement or not. So if we couldn't count the station, then it's like it didn't exist to us and we still needed a new one there.
I think you answered the following question to a degree in terms of you can sign up for an email. But the question is, how can we know when a charging station becomes operational and what EV charging apps are notified?
Yeah, so pretty much any charging app is going to have our stations as they come online. Um, Behind the scenes, there's essentially a single platform that charging stations send their data to say like the station is available. There's at least a daily update to that, depending on who you're getting your information from, even more often than that. But everybody gets it at least daily. So if one of our charging stations became open tomorrow, it would show up on your map no later than the next day. Some charging stations do not show up that easily if they either have their network provider doesn't provide that kind of data to the national network, or if the station is not networked, like it's basically like your home charger, you just plug in and it charges. That national database is not going to know that charger exists unless somebody tells it. But for our stations, there's a number of like data requirements and data sharing that go along with it. So they will pop up very quickly on any app interface that gets updates.
Okay, thank you. What is the best way for a community like Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, to engage in the process to get EV chargers installed? And what types of organizations can receive the money if awarded?
So for the NEVI program, that would be a matter of working with the planning partner to say that either the town as a whole, or even a town like Bethlehem is big enough, you could have you could go finer than that. You could say this community within Bethlehem or this zip code is where we really need more charging. But getting that to your planning partner, which in that case would be Lehigh Valley. If you're not talking NEVI, then there's there's many other broader things than that. Most of them would involve working with the local government to either be encouraging stations or at least not be limiting, not being cumbersome to anyone that wants to come in and build a charging station. In terms of who can apply and receive funds, it's any entity. So you can't apply as an individual, but it could be a for-profit company, it could be a nonprofit, it could be a local government, it could be a parking authority. Any entity can apply for NEVI funds.
And the next question you may have addressed in an earlier answer, but the question is, how do you address private charging stations such as businesses that host Tesla superchargers relative to coverage, intervals between chargers, etc.?
So, the NEVI network is almost entirely on privately owned property, but the charging stations are made available 24/7. So as long as the charger is available to the public and it meets the set requirements, like we can count it, it still counts as part of the public charging network. If it truly is private charging, it's either for customers only, or the most common that you'll see this is like hotels. It'll be for people who are staying at the hotel. Even if it shows up on the map of public chargers, like if you click on it, it'll say like guests only. Obviously places like that would not count because it's not 24/7 to the general public for our purposes. Yeah.
Do you know if anyone is working to get utility tariffs changed so that electric utilities can install EV chargers on their infrastructure, such as poles?
Yeah, so utility, whole big world, and that can be its own, hour plus. Uh, so yeah, in Pennsylvania, there's not currently authority for utilities to kind of own and operate their own chargers. Um, they don't really have to. There's still other ways that they can support EV chargers, either through incentives that are paid with ratepayer funds, or through different pricing structures for electricity that flows to charging stations. So there's still a lot that they can do in this space, even if they're not the ones who are owning and operating the charger. In states that do have utilities doing that, it does become very contentious because they can usually have much lower pricing than your privately owned companies out there. And you run into just open competition complaints, that sort of stuff. But our Public Utility Commission has released basically a policy statement encouraging our utilities to adopt tariffs or prices for EV charging stations, specifically for EV charging stations. So that applies to both home chargers as well as public chargers or fleet chargers. Really, three different own separate categories when you talk utility pricing world. They're each taking their own approach to that. It is just a recommendation, so they don't have to. We're definitely seeing the most movement there from PECO in Philly and from Duquesne Light in Pittsburgh. But each of our major utilities are thinking about that and making their decisions.
Joe, can I add to that?
Sure.
Yeah, Colton, this is Steve Olszewski. I asked that question. The problem I'm running into in Bethlehem, the utilities PPL, is they own the poles. We're trying to figure out how to install EV chargers curbside for people that don't have garages or a way to charge in their residences. So the best way to do it would be to put an EV charger on a pole, an electric pole that's already curbside, and let them plug in. But PPL owns the pole. They're not allowed by tariff to install an EV charger, and they don't want to get involved with having private companies install private equipment on their poles.
Yep.
So we're kind of stuck,
Yeah, so it
right?
is a really great idea to have chargers on poles, and you mean the electric poles, not like light poles, right?
Correct.
Yeah, it's a really great thought, and it's not just PPL, it's not just Pennsylvania. This is nationally. It's not a space that utilities like to get into, nor is it really like conducive, or it just there's a lot of reasons why it becomes a nightmare for them to go down that road. Some people have tried pilots, and they usually don't go beyond the pilot because it's just a bit of a mess. So there are other ways to get into curbside charging. Um, Curbside charging is again its own huge topic. There are a few uh, there are a few companies that they kind of do it on a city by city basis, and they do a bring your own cord model. It's very common in Europe, but essentially you make it a subscription based, and people pay to have the ability to use any of the curbside chargers in a city on a month to month basis, and you install a number of them all around. As an example, one of those companies, rather than running the power from the light pole or trying to deal with the utility at all, in fact, they run the power from whatever home or business is right there. They run it under the sidewalk and they pop it up at the end of the sidewalk. And that's where they have their post that you bring your own cord and plug into. So I don't know if you've seen any of those companies. Bethlehem might be a little bit of a small city for them at this point. They're really chasing after the very big cities to start with and to have a good base to work with. I think if you see one of those companies pop up in Philly and they get their foot under them there, then it could be a good like branch location, not too far away. But in general, curbside charging is actually one of the most difficult places for charging to really have a breakthrough.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And you may have put a couple links in some of the later slides relative to this question, which is where can we find up-to-date information on federal and state rebates on EVs? I'm concerned about sudden withdrawal of federal rebates coming up.
Yeah, I mean the state ones, they are they're state funded, so we wouldn't have concern with them immediately changing. On the federal side, it would take new legislation, and then it would be whenever that new legislation takes effect that the incentives would change. So, I do believe the reconciliation bill being considered would, eliminate most, if not all, of the EV tax credits pretty quickly. So that is certainly out there, but again, it would have to get through both chambers of Congress and then be signed, and then it would have an effective date. So it wouldn't happen overnight that those tax credits could go away. So for the time being, they continue to go exist.
And what roles are local governments taking relative to EV charging?
I would say that most local governments, it's not really a space that they get into, but local governments who do get into it, there is a number of things you can do. I always say if you're going to do nothing else as a local government with regard to electric vehicles, at least, and I say this because it doesn't really matter if your local government is pro or against or ambivalent, but you should check your local permitting and zoning to see what you would do if somebody said they wanted to put in an EV charger, because 90+% of municipalities in the country do not have a category that really makes sense for EV charging considered with whatever other or obscure or just like it doesn't really make sense. Square peg round hole is just the expression that comes up time and again in NEVI world, but it also applies to some other aspects of EV charging as well, and this is one of them. So if nothing else, your local government should at least make sure that you have a zoning and permitting process for EV charging that makes sense for EV charging. Like, let's not make this too hard, but let's also consider like what are maybe legitimate safety or design considerations for how we would permit an EV charger, and not just have to bundle it in some way that doesn't make sense. Aside from that, like I said, there's lots of things you can do. Some of them are very small hanging fruit. Like we have our guidance on level 1 charging over sidewalks. Municipality can look at that. They can copy and paste our document, put their name on it, and pass it at their next council meeting and say like, hey, we have a process now to make sure that people can safely charge over the sidewalk without creating a pedestrian safety issue. There's other things that you can do if you actually want to be encouraging of electric vehicles. A big one in this space would be generally called like a model ordinance or EV make ready ordinance. And that says that, hey, when you have new developments going in, whether them be housing developments or commercial, that you have set rules for how it's ready for EV charging. So, maybe a house has to have that 220 volt outlet in the garage. Or in the case of commercial, like, hey, if you're installing a workplace that has more than, 50 parking spaces for employees, 4 of those parking spaces have to have the electric run to them that you could put in EV chargers when you want to, as examples. So there's a pretty wide spectrum, and it ranges everything from like, let's just make sure we're ready to like, yeah, let's make sure that we're encouraging this and facilitating it.
How do you engage with the planning partner for NEVI? Is it all through their website?
Yeah, so if they don't have anything that's like obvious or straightforward on their website, some of them do have a page dedicated to this EV charging outreach that they're doing. Some of them might not be so straightforward. They all have a general email contact, so you could just reach out and say, what do you have available that I can provide input on community charging needs for NEVI program, and they'll let you know what their efforts are, what meetings they either have already had or plan to have, or if they did a survey and let you do it maybe after the fact, or they have a survey coming up. They're all taking kind of a different approach, whatever makes sense to them. But yeah, it's a good way to reach out and see what you can do to have that feedback heard.
And what is the timeline to provide highway signs indicating exits with chargers and basic directions to charging stations?
Yeah, so highway signage is a very strict and regulated space. It's a national standard for how highway signage works and what you're allowed to do. Um, Up until last year, the national rules for EV charging was basically if you were a business that already offered fueling, like you already sold gas, then you could put a banner at the bottom of your logo that said EV charging. So like you could say on the highway sign, we also have EV charging. But if you didn't already sell gas, then your only option was, again, that obscure other, as we were talking about for permitting. There wasn't really a way for Walmart to say we have EV charging, as an example. There was no good way to do that. And because there wasn't a good way, most states didn't do it at all. It was just last year that they updated that rule book for all the states in the country that says, we have a little bit more of a process for how you could sign EV charging regardless of what the business is. It's still easier and nicer if you already sell gas, but there's at least a better option now for others. Each state now has to take that and decide if and how they want to incorporate in that the signage that they're doing. So PennDOT right now is in the middle of that, and working towards, like here's our process and here's how we'll make the rules and sign EV chargers, even if it's not at a gas station. And once that's done, then we'll be able to update, the signage throughout the state for the highway exits. So once you're off the highway, it's a little bit, it depends on if you're on a state or a local roadway to an extent. But, we're mostly focused on getting those highway signs to a place that we can say there's EV charging, even if it's not a gas station.
Will a CCS to NACS adapter work at any Tesla charger? And how is billing handled? And finally, you stated L2 charging is more expensive than L1. Is this because of the initial cost of the charger?
All right, three things. Let me see if I can remember them. So CCS to NACS. So Tesla stations, the behind the scenes here is that Tesla out there now has Generation 2, Generation 3, and Generation 4 superchargers. On their website, if you go to Tesla's website and you see the map of all their superchargers, every station has one of three symbols. The Generation 2 chargers have a symbol that means Tesla only. Even if you have an adapter, even if your vehicle is approved for an adapter, that station is not able to charge a CCS native port vehicle because it does not have CCS software built into it. We talked earlier about how really the integration was when Tesla vehicles switched to being able to talk in CCS language. Well, those older superchargers do not have CCS language and can't get to that place. So the Gen 2 superchargers will never be able to charge a CCS native vehicle. And that I think it's not just CCS native vehicle. I think even the vehicles that get NACS ports, like there's now a few Hyundai vehicles that have a NACS port on them, they won't work for them either. It has to be Tesla. It can only talk in Tesla software language. So most Tesla superchargers out there are Generation 3, which is that if you have an adapter, you can charge there. But you have to have an adapter and your vehicle has to be approved for using that adapter. So like we have a number of vehicles, mine included, is from a manufacturer that they haven't approved the adapter yet. So even if I bought like a Ford approved adapter, it's not going to work on my vehicle because when I plug it into the charger, it's going to recognize my vehicle make and model. It's going to say, we haven't worked out all the kinks on how we do a handshake yet, so I'm not allowed to charge to your vehicle model yet. Lastly, Tesla, there's just a few of them to this point. I think there's only about 5 in Pennsylvania so far, but most of the new ones that open will be Generation 4, which means that they will have built-in NACS and CCS. So you won't have to show up with an adapter. It won't matter what your vehicle is. As long as you have a CCS or a NACS port, you'll be able to charge using it. So like I said, we're in a little bit of that messy middle. And it's going to continue getting better as we move along here. That was question 1. What were the other 2?
Question 2 is, how is billing handled?
Yeah, so that's like for NEVI stations, our only role is to make sure that the pricing is quote reasonable, which from our take really just means that it's not out of line with what other stations charge or what that company charges nationally. So we're not in the pricing world, but yeah, billing is just just like a gas station. You pay either through an app or with a credit card. All of the stations that we fund are required to accept credit card. You don't have to have an app to charge any of our stations, but I know a lot of legacy chargers out there will make you use that company's app to be able to pay.
And then the last part of that question was L2 charging is more expensive than L1. Is that because of the initial cost of the charger?
Yeah, so I mean, level one charging is an outlet, so like there is no cost aside from the electricity. Like the infrastructure already exists. There's nothing else that needs to be done or paid for. You just plug in, and whatever meter the electricity is running through pays for it. Level two, even if it's at home, it's going to cost you a little bit more because you have to buy the level two charger. Unless you use the one that comes with the vehicle, then obviously that doesn't cost you anything extra, but that is not quite the same level of charging speed as if you installed one. Those are generally a bit faster. If you're in public, a level two charger will always cost more, one, because they had to pay to install it, but also because there are fees to maintain and operate a station. Charging stations, all of them that are networked at least, basically means that they have like a cell data plan where it connects to cell towers, and they have a cell phone bill. That's essentially. So it's going to cost you something extra because they have to maintain it, and they have their own ongoing expenses.
Okay, and then when do you think the 50-mile goal will be complete along the charging desert between Pittsburgh and Allentown, specifically highways 70, 76, 81, and 78?
Let me think here. What's the first charger we have that might open on that stretch? Um, Tesla Somerset will probably be our first station in that stretch to open. I would guess late third quarter to fourth quarter this year is when Somerset should open. We obviously have a number of stations along that stretch. I just think that'll be the first one. It's not really in the middle of that charging desert, but EVgo's station in Monroeville, that one's currently tentatively thinking June sometime. So that one's pretty soon. Again, stations can get delayed at the last minute, even for months. So like, don't hold anyone to that kind of estimate. But if all goes well, that one could be open pretty soon. Yeah, so we have, hopefully there'll be improvement there. Not too long.
Okay. That's all the questions that I see from the chat. Any questions from the floor?
Guess not. Thank you, Colton. Very informative. Looks like we've made a lot of progress. And you sound optimistic that the funding will stay in place to keep the work going. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, the basic there is that like all of our 90 projects are moving forward. Those projects have expenses, and we continue to get reimbursement from Federal Highway for them. So we know that those are good to go. And then yeah, the guidance that Federal Highways put out there, and they have stated to Congress and congressional hearings, is that they're going to get new NEVI guidance, and that once there's new guidance, states will do new state plans, and once those state plans are done and approved, then we'll be able to use our NEVI dollars again. So yeah, it's there. It's being delayed significantly if none of this happened, obviously. But it's still there, and there's not really a way for it to be rescinded or changed dramatically. So we're just sticking with it. And we're gonna, as long as NEVI program exists, we're gonna fight to make sure that we get those dollars that have been appropriated to us, and that we use the funds as best we can.
Are you getting plenty of people bidding on these stations? Or are you having to work hard to get them to bid? to build
Yeah,
them?
so that's a good question. Obviously, so all of our bids happen in 23 and 24. So it's a very different world now. Certain time will tell, when this point nobody has open funding rounds really because, that you can't do new projects with NEVI nationally. But at some point we'll have a new funding round. We'll see if how much has or hasn't changed in that space. But yeah, when we did have our open funding rounds, we always had pretty good interest. We generally had about 3 times as many applications as we did awards. So that was not spread evenly across the state. Obviously, we had spaces where we wanted a project and we didn't get any, or we only got one application and we had to decide if it was a good project or not. And then we would have other segments where we got 10 applications. We had to pick the best one. And that's sometimes a good problem to have, I guess. Sometimes a tough problem. But yeah, so we've generally had. I think one of the things that really surprised us is we thought that kind of like the lower demand areas, like segments of I-80 where there's no major town and 20 miles in either direction. We were concerned that there just would not be any interest in putting in a station there because the anticipated demand would be too low. But we were largely pleasantly surprised that we saw applications pretty much consistently across the state. I was also kind of surprised that I thought that our areas that were close to Philly, we would just get so many applications there. But we had segments where we only got 3 or 4 applications, even if it was in a very populated um, area in the surrounding Philly. So it's been interesting to see. It was a bit more uniform throughout the state than I expected it to be.
Oh, that's great.
So that sort of makes sense in that in the cities, people that have EVs a lot of them are probably charging them at home. And then when they need that public charger the most is when they make long trips. At least
Yeah,
that's how it
to
works for me.
to an extent, but yeah, really when it comes, so it takes the best stations will have both. The best stations, so we get really good usage data for our charging stations. It's been really interesting to watch that starting to trickle in over the last year here. For a while, we just had our one station that was open in Pittston, close to Scranton. But now we have 10 stations were open and provide us with data at the end of first quarter. So yeah, like our 2 highest performing stations by far are Pittston, close to Scranton, and then Aston, close to the Delaware border, south of Philly. And they're just by far and away, they're like 20 charging sessions a day and 30 charging sessions a day, respectively. And our next highest station is not even 10. So it does help a lot when you are closer to community because those people who do not that cannot reliably or consistently charge at home, they're going to be charging 2 to 4 times a month. Whereas, if you're along I-80, you get when somebody charges, once or twice a year, and there just are not near as many EV registrations in the surrounding counties around I-80 as there would be in Philly. That EV registration data I was talking about, Philly and the collar counties is 26% of vehicle registrations in Pennsylvania, but 49% of the electric vehicles. So just the concentration of EVs in the area really increases the local charging demand. It is kind of just astounding. Like literally half of our EVs are in 5 counties.
All right. Any other questions or comments for Colton? All right. Well, Colton, thank you for taking the time to spend the evening with us. We appreciate it. We appreciate all the work you've done. Thank you.